Ready? Play.
Yeah, start whenever you're ready. I know I'm dark, but that'll have to do. That'll amuse some people.
That works for me. Yeah, so look, we're here today to talk a little bit about, I guess, Davis Cup as a whole, national team events in tennis and representing your nation. And the reason why we're having this conversation is because Jannik Sinner, who has spent many, many weeks at world number one as of the last year and a half, he opted out of Davis Cup this year. And for some, I guess that would be a surprise. To others, maybe not as much. It was kind of rumored in, I think, some sort of interview that happened 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. And I
Okay.
wasn't quite sure, and that just kind of made me think about kind of how the Davis Cup stacks up as an event itself, but also kind of like in relation to other sports. Because I mean, here we're talking about, you know, without question, a top two player in the world who, means so much to the sport. And with tennis being an individual sport, these players drive so much attention, revenue, whatever it may be. And to have a player not represent their country at the last eight, the finals of the Davis Cup, it definitely, it's an interesting situation. I think it deserves some conversation. So I think that's why we're here. I guess I'll start by posing the question to you, John. Like, were you surprised by this decision, and do you think it's a big deal?
I like everything you've said, and I also like the question because I think it leads off into so many facets of tennis that I find interesting. First of all, I'd just like to know, you said you thought you heard something a week or two or a couple of weeks ago about his non. Can you remember where that was or what it was?
Yeah, it was some rumor. Like, the other part of the rumor was that he wasn't going to play in Paris, which I found very,
Okay.
very shocking. So, but it did. I promise that I heard that he wasn't going to play Davis Cup
Oh,
fairly early on. Let's say in this month of October.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I probably, when I first saw it, I didn't react maybe in the same way as half of tennis lovers, let's call them, of all different shapes and sizes. I probably reacted like the other half as to, my okay, fair enough. I saw his explanation. I also factored in, which I know you have in your thinking, which is the fact he's done it twice and won it twice. Novak Djokovic, for example, who said in 2023 that he was on a mission very much that year to help Serbia win the Davis Cup. Hadn't won the Davis Cup with Serbia for such a long time, and he'd done everything else twice or more in tennis, and so he would have liked to have. I think he's won the Davis Cup once with Serbia, but it was a long time ago. So that was a mission for him. I can understand why it's not a huge mission for Jannik Sinner in an individual sport. Now, again, that's the key and opens up all sorts of things. But I mean, there'll be a lot of people watching who may initially be like, yeah, but he plays for Italy and blah blah blah, and I'm Italian, or maybe there's others out there that are going, they love the Davis Cup and so on and so forth. And yet you'll find Andy Murray fans, whatever their nationality, are probably pulling for Andy Murray when he's playing the Olympics, or Novak Djokovic fans of whatever their nationality are pulling for Novak Djokovic when he's playing the Olympics, but probably also the Davis Cup as well. And I think probably if there's a big British fan of Novak Djokovic, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if Djokovic versus Draper or Djokovic versus anyone, but particularly a British player, obviously, given if that person was British, they wouldn't. And I don't have a big problem with that because I think the feelings that tennis players have, particularly in the last 20 years, I think it has changed. The big three, social media, tennis fandom has evolved a lot in some positive ways and in some negative. In that 20 years ago, you're German. 30 years ago, German, you're supporting Steffi Graf, Boris Becker, Michael Stich, whoever the big German heavyweights were at the time. If you're British, you're supporting Tim Henman. I can go back further to players like Jeremy Bates and obviously, Mark Petchey as well. So whoever the British player was, because but basically most tennis fans then were actually probably, I know we still talk about this tennis fandom and they do exist, but most tennis fans then would be watching 2 weeks in the UK, London, maybe Queens as well if you're lucky. But if you're French, you're probably watching the French Open. If you're Spanish, you're probably watching the French Open, maybe a tournament in Spain as well. But the amount of tennis consumption was so much smaller then. And tennis fandom was very, very different. I think there's a lot of other elements. I think social media and this obsession with the big three, that whether you're a Rafa, Roger, or Novak fan, meant that you just became so obsessed with them. There is another thing as well, with which I think differs from other sports, is that our support of our team, whether it be national or club, whether it be soccer, American football, hockey, cricket, whatever, it is a bit more objective, funnily enough. You'll criticize your team. It's probably not quite the same as an absolute neutral. You might go to greater extremes. You think your team is 100 times worse and every player should be fired, to the other extreme of their gods and they're going to win every title going, whatever that sport happens to be. In tennis, your loyalty is not to a badge, a city, a country, a club. Your loyalty is to that player, and they're always right. Novak's not making mistakes. Rafa's not making mistakes. Roger's not making mistakes. Iga or Arena are not making mistakes. The coach is making a mistake, or someone else in their team is making a mistake, or it's the fans, or it's something's going on with the opponent, or everyone else is to blame. So there's a lot of individuality going on more now than ever before. As a result, I think some team events have diminished a little in the last 20 years. Anyway, I think that's enough of a beginning to this, at least.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, for sure. Well, what comes to mind is kind of differentiating the Davis Cup and the Olympics. I think that's kind of important because, right, Olympics, you're only having it every 4 years. So,
yeah.
And Davis Cup.
If this was the Olympics, I know the Olympics is not going to ever take place in November, but Jannik's playing. He's never won a gold medal, and you get 4 years. 4 years a shot.
Exactly. So that's like something that I was thinking about coming into this conversation, because Davis Cup, it's unique, but when we have this conversation, the one thing that points out is that it's an annual event. And that's where, as a consumer, you do kind of have that understanding in such an individualized sport where at points it does take precedent. And in this case, Jannik has done very, very hard work the past 2 seasons. And if you think of the time frame, the end of November, right, you don't want to be playing anything beyond, I guess, the ATP finals. But with that being said, I think like Davis Cup is special, right? Not only the opportunity to represent your country, but I think it brings in that kind of nationwide sort of united type of feeling. And that comes from the atmosphere. I mean, it's an atmosphere that's unlike anything else in tennis, because you have groups of fans who are, collectively supporting one player, and they're typically in these arenas, they're segregated in a sense, and they have their own bands, and it really feels that way. But kind of on the flip side of it is where it's an individual sport. You only get to, represent your nation, wear that team shirt, share a locker room, have a team captain so many times, right? And so that's why I think Davis Cup is so special, and I think it's different compared to other sports, because you do get that team aspect. You get that, collective strategy, fans backing their country as opposed to an individual. But that's like you said, you brought it up. So yeah, I think it would be more special if it were to happen, every 2 years, every 3 years, whatever it may be. So that's kind of like, I guess that's the determining factor here, especially when it comes to Jannik Sinner. But are we not going to bring up Carlos Alcaraz? He is deciding to represent his country, whereas in the previous tie, he did not. So I think that's also raising a question. And something we talked a little bit about is scheduling. I think it's important. You kind of want to explain to someone why it might hurt Sinner to play this event because of his off season, then his preseason, and what it looks like kind of leading up to Australia for him.
Just one more thing that's sort of related to a
Mhm.
little bit about what I was saying before, but also some of the things you've said
Mhm.
before I then talk about the different strategies that Alcaraz and Sinner might be deploying at this point, is that I was quite intrigued to know the reaction in the Italian media to this announcement from Jannik that he's not going to play Davis Cup. And I spoke to Mario about this before we recorded this, and I also checked out one Italian tennis journalist anyway response. But actually, I saw the Italian journalist response, and I know kind of where he's at in terms of the fact that he's an Italian, he's a tennis journalist. I think he favors Italian tennis players. He's written a book about one Italian tennis player. When there's anything about Jannik Sinner, you can guess which side of the fence he's on whatever the debate is. And obviously, there's one big one, and I don't need to elaborate on that. And yet, I also kind of guessed I knew what his line would be on this latest Jannik Sinner development, which was a tennis-related response to someone who obviously enjoys watching Jannik Sinner and enjoys watching him represent Italy. And yet, his response was exactly as I expected. He totally understood it. It's like, yep, he's my man, and I'm gonna kind of take his side, and maybe he's right to do that. But I also just knew that he was going to take, despite his Italian loyalties, which is where the origin comes from. But he doesn't lose that in his, let's say, support of Jannik. And I know people will be out there saying journalists shouldn't behave like that. Well, yeah, I would probably agree with that. But good luck with finding someone who's super objective on all these matters.
But let me quickly stop you there, John.
Go on.
Would you, let's say they didn't win. How about they hadn't won it in 5 years? As in, like, take away the last 2 years.
That changes a lot. Yeah, and he played. He won it for them.
Exactly.
Probably in 2023, single-handedly, probably 2024. So yeah, it does. It changes a lot, and maybe then it would be different. But actually, I think if he hadn't won it, and he wasn't where he is at as a status, I think he probably does play Davis Cup, because maybe a Davis Cup win might be more important to him and his locker than a third Australian Open. Might be just because of the absence of a Davis Cup. I don't know. That's all ifs, buts, and maybes. But anyway, he's not playing, and I do think obviously winning it twice before helps. Anyway, but rather than just take that one, because that's the only Italian journalist I thought I'd seen, I thought I'd seek out what Mario thinks and also what the reaction has been regarding the Italian media as a whole. And he said basically tennis media are totally fine with it. Maybe some other elements of the media and some other elements of life are not so keen on the decision, but as I expected, the tennis media in Italy are totally fine with it. In fact, it might be non-Italians that are questioning it more. So yeah. Do you want me to respond to the Alcaraz and Sinner bit as well?
How about, like, explain? Do you want to explain a little bit why? Because the only thing that I'm thinking of, and it's fair, is we have a player in Alcaraz who has played essentially all year, right? He only had a small injury after Barcelona, didn't play Madrid. He did sit out another Masters event, Shanghai rather. But Jannik Sinner missed 3 months in the season. Does that make a difference at all? Or are you still thinking about how do you manage your off season in preparation for Australia?
I think that 3 months now energy saving probably is up, if that makes sense, that you will benefit from that at times, maybe during the French Open, maybe during Wimbledon. I say the French Open, people say, well, that's quite early on, but he'd already played Rome. He'd already had almost, pretty much 2 weeks of clay court, or 3 weeks of clay court tennis, including Rome, pretty intense, that by the time he arrives in the final, he's ready to compete in that final. And I think we'll all agree with that. So pretty much from that moment onwards, we're really in the benefit period through the grass court season, and in particular at Wimbledon for sure. So I think that the benefits will at some point will stop being a benefit. Do we look at now as being a benefit? I don't really think it makes. Now you still need to go, you know what, I'll play 2 weeks of tennis here and I'll have a week off, or 3 weeks of tennis here and 2 weeks off, or 1 week here and then 2 weeks off. I think we're back in that situation that I think after 6 months, I know we look at players' seasons and we go, wow, it's 11 months and it's 11 months non-stop tennis. But of course, the top players can afford to take a week off here and there. But once those, I don't think the effects of January and February are really in your legs right now. It's the effects really from the last couple of months that'll be really affecting you. What happened in January will probably have an impact on March, and what happens in March will have an impact maybe on May. But if you're playing, non-stop tennis and you're pretty much fit with the odd exception like the Cincinnati final, I don't see that now coming into play, because, if you do then continue to keep playing every tournament, for example, October, November, I think that could then have an impact on the beginning of January. And I don't think Carlos and Jannik, especially having spoken to you a little bit today, maybe I've changed my mind slightly, I don't think either of them will play a warm-up for Australia like they've basically not done for the last couple of years. But maybe Jannik might surprise us, and that might, if he signs up for Brisbane, for example, then we'll go, okay. Or if Jannik and Carlos both sign up for Brisbane, I think that's probably the sweet spot tournament. We looked at the calendars, didn't we, earlier on today, and saying that they're not going to play Hong Kong. They're not going to play in the week before Australia. So if they were to, and if either of them do, or if both of them do, or if Jannik does in particular, then that might sort of make a bit more sense. And I know you sort of were highlighting that the 5 days for Jannik of competition, yeah, it is only, I guess, 4 or 5 days, but there's also I don't know what he would be normally doing in that week or two. Plus, he can maybe come back to the practice court a week earlier and work on stuff. I mean, he's been talking about since September, hasn't he? Since the press conference after the lost US Open final, that he wants to work on stuff to beat Carlos. And, can he do that in a Davis Cup? Almost certainly not. Even in training, you might be training on certain aspects, because although he's got a good distance between him and his opponents, I don't think he would be disrespectful as to represent Italy at Davis Cup and the night before practice drop shots, even though that wouldn't be the tactic he was going to use in the following day's match or whatever. So, yeah, and he certainly cited that as being a reason behind his decision. But as we've already spoken about, I do think the fact that he's won it twice really the last couple of years is another huge element to this.
Right. And I think the timing of it is difficult, I think, for a few reasons. But when you kind of look at it through a microscope, it does make more sense, right? That Sinner is making this decision, because you look at the month and a half prior, it starts, with the Asian swing and finishing off in Shanghai. Yes, he didn't go as far as we thought he would. But, then you come back to the indoor season and, you go Vienna, you go Paris, and then you probably have a week, but you're prepping for the ATP finals. And then, more or less, that's 5 matches. And then the next week you have to go play again. So look, it is a big workload, I think, towards the tail end of the season. And that I guess begs me to ask you, I think it's always a tough time of the year having this tournament at the end of the season, but would there be a better time of the season to put this, especially the finals? Because I know throughout the year we're working it in, and it is special, I think, every time that the Davis Cup is on, but it's just having the finals at the end of November is tough for situations like this.
I love talks about the calendar, and I have so many ideas and I have so many rethinks about it, and I wish I will do this one day with a pen and paper, and I'll ask a few others to do it, and we'll do one big long show that could last for 5 hours where we all discuss our ideal tennis calendars. Off the top of my head, my initial reaction is actually I still think it's probably the best time for it, just because it's not going to happen in January, of course, with everyone in Australia and so on and so forth. It probably, for now, has to remain in Europe in terms of the format it's in right now. I also think in terms of its value, by the way, coming back to something else, I think history is so important. I think the United Cup, it was called the ATP Cup, wasn't it? And then obviously it joined with, I think it's players want to win their respective matches, and I do think Coco Gauff's value in her win over Iga, I think they played each other in January, I think that does have some value in an individual way, and then going forward, and then she could beat her again, and so on and so forth. That, I think, was the second time she'd beaten her in the space of a couple of months. So I do think this, but yeah, it's not. And then, the value of team events, actually, you mentioned there's only so many times that you can win the Davis Cup. Well, actually, you can play Davis Cup 3 or 4 times a year, or 3 times a year. But, I actually would be very much a big fan of playing less team events. I would go with, I don't know. I don't really feel much about the United Cup. I would rather watch a bunch of 250s, to be honest with you, in the build-up to the Australian Open. I'd rather see just a non-stop stream of 250s in that 2 or 3 weeks. I even think you'd be more likely to get, I think Jannik and Carlos probably don't want to play United Cup. I don't think they've ever played it. I could be wrong.
Right.
Maybe Carlos, or certainly haven't played it in the last year or two. And I think if they are to play anything, they're going to play a 250. Just like I think if Novak ever plays a warm-up, he's playing a 250. Rafa in 2024 with that sort of, as it turned out, ill-fated return, played just a 250 in Brisbane. Just because I just think it's a better springboard. I think the uncertainty of how many matches you're going to play, and I know you could say that with a singles event, but at least it's in your hands. And if you go out early in Brisbane, well, so be it. But if you're maybe the only strong member of your team, I'm thinking maybe Casper Ruud here, for example, you might be better off playing a 250 2 weeks before. So anyway, where it should come in the calendar and how often we should have these team events, yeah, I just don't think, I'd be okay with another United tennis team event, perhaps. Maybe the Laver Cup could be that, for example, or we could have the Laver Cup every 2 years and have the Davis Cup every odd year. Let's say we had a Laver Cup every even year and the Davis Cup every odd year. I think that would make these events more special, and in the sense of the Laver Cup, may even make it more profitable. I don't know, because I think that is a big question. But these are all big questions. But I think, just as a tennis fan, this is just my opinion, and there'll be hundreds of people probably getting in the comments below that they'll have different opinions on some of the things that I'm saying in particular right now. But I think less is more when it comes to the team events in particular. There may be strong cases for others, but the value of a World Cup in soccer, when that whistle goes and you lose 2-1 in extra time, or you miss the penalty, you only play that tournament if you're lucky, if you come from a good, a well-recognized nation that are qualifying all the time, and you're one of your stars, that you might get another 2 opportunities in your career, 3 opportunities, exceptions of Messi and Ronaldo, but the other stars, if you're the big star for Peru or the big star for Sweden, that might be it. You might never play in a World Cup again.
Exactly.
And that's why you see these players so devastated at the end and so overjoyed at the end of these encounters. And I think, if we could have a day, I would be fine with the Davis Cup, Billie Jean King Cup being every 2 years, for example, and Laver Cup stay on the calendar, but every 2 years, and it's every 4 years it's in Europe, and every 4 years somewhere else. Again, that adds to the drama of perhaps what that event could be. So I think less is more. I think, yes, I understand. The Hopman Cup sort of seems to be a weird thing that just bounces around the calendar and has absolutely no place or interest from anyone, really.
Yep.
I have no idea how competitive those matches are, and I don't think 99% of the tennis world knows how competitive they are, because nobody watches. So yeah, I don't know if I've gone off for too much of a tangent there. But
no, that's good. I agree with a lot of your saying. I think kind of like my concluding point here, especially on the Davis Cup side of things, is where I think there does need to be sort of like a more special aspect to it. And I think the biannually, or every 3 years, whatever it may be, I think that would help, because I'm just thinking about, in this circumstance, guess who's hosting the Davis Cup? Italy. Where is it? Bologna. So as an Italian, right, you're excited to go to this event, support your country, and
good point.
Your number one's not playing. It's like
you bought the tickets.
Yeah, it's a little mind-boggling, and you're expecting Sinner, Musetti, Berrettini, and Vava and Pavasori and Bolelli, or whatever it may be. You probably don't need Bolelli anyway. but you're going to this event and that's what you're expecting, and then you're getting not your best guys, and it feels a little bit retracted and a bit diminished maybe. And I'm curious, we'll see what unfolds, and it would definitely bring this conversation to light, say Spain were to win the Davis Cup in 2025, given who starred on their roster. But yeah, I think it's very I think it's an important conversation to have, just because I think it's a special event, and it means a lot to all the people who do represent their country, because it's just unique in our sport, right? You don't get together as a team very, very often, and I think these guys do value that. So how could we, configure that with the fans and the players to kind of elevate this sort of event?
Yeah, I do think so. But yeah, I think I've kind of had a pretty long rant. But aside from calendar tweaks and alterations, which I think, as I say, is certainly a separate podcast. Yeah, I think that's it. I do feel a bit for those fans. But when you're a fan of sport, a fan of, especially with a team event, in a way, if we are trying to big up the team element to this, that's it. When you buy a ticket to watch, I mean, for example, my nephew wants to watch Cologne play Bayern next week, and I was saying to him, look, be careful, because he wants to see Harry Kane. You see, but I said, listen, this is a cup match. I think there's a very good chance he'll be on the bench, and the coach of Bayern is not under pressure to play Harry Kane, because my 11-year-old nephew wants to watch that encounter. Unfortunately, he won't be changing his mind as a result. So yeah, that's it. And if you, I would say there's always a chance. You buy your US Open ticket, you buy a semi-final ticket, and you expect to see Alcaraz against Djokovic, or Sinner against Shelton, or whatever your combo is that you're looking forward to.
Great example this year.
Exactly, Shelton in one case, obviously Alcaraz, Djokovic, but it was a damn squib in a red. So that is sport, and that's why we also know that these matches that we see, like Sinner and Alcaraz at the French Open, they get elevated to another level because they're not that common, although those two do seem to produce a lot of those. But still, even those two, might not meet in every final. And you also, that's how it is, So when you're buying your ticket as a sports fan, yes, it is disappointing, but it happens. And yeah, you should really know that can happen, at least, should maybe be written on the tickets, a little asterisk saying we can't guarantee every single player that's going to be playing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate you having that conversation, and we'll see how it goes.
There's loads more for this to evolve.
Yeah,
there'll be some comments as well that may spark further debate. There may be another incident. Yannick might, as I say, play a warm up, and then things will become clear, or something else will take another twist, and it won't make this less relevant. I always look at these sort of social science debates as like, that's just the platform, and we keep evolving and hopefully get a little bit closer to a good ending. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.